Hi, Enda. I'm just about to share my slides. Is that okay? Okay.
Hi, Ellen. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Okay. All right. I'd like to introduce you to my students before you start, if that's possible. Just a quick introductions. Selamat pagi para mahasiswa. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, Bu.
Okay, so today we're going to speak in English, okay? Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you
Morning.
all today virtually. And we are very honored to have Dr. Alan Lee from the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. She is the expert in motivations. So she's going to share with us her expertise on motivation theory. Today she's going to talk about self-determination theory, and I believe that you all already read the papers that she sent to us. So Alan, these are my students. Probably a few of them coming late or something like that. So please allow them to come in and join with you. We are very excited to have your talks and to learn directly from you. Thank you very much again for that you accept our invitations, for your kindness to share your expertise with us, and hopefully more students interested to study about motivations, because this is something that is very important, not only in theoretical but in practical implementations. All right, so without further ado, Alan, yeah, now it's your seasons.
Thank you, Enda. Do I have 1 hour? Is that correct?
Yes, you have 1 hour, or you may use more than 1 hour or less, or you may include question and answer sessions too in between. So now you're the boss here, so it's everything for you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you everyone for having me speak about motivation today. I've actually known Enda for a very long time. So it was really lovely to have this opportunity to speak today. I believe we did our PhD together. We had the same supervisors, the supervisor, Professor Paul Ayres. So we have lots of stories that we can share. So I'm very happy to be here. So I will be talking about motivation today. And while I talk about motivation, the other areas of speciality that I look at in relation with research is also with cognitive load theory, which Enda also is a specialist in, and also special and inclusive education as well. So you might find that I speak to 3 areas, but today, majority of the time, 90% of the time, I will be focusing on motivation, specifically self-determination theory. Okay, at any point in time, if you have any questions, put it into the chat. There may be some slides where I would want you to participate in, annotate on. So if you're not familiar with it, I will guide you so you can start annotating. And when I talk about annotating, it's talking about drawing on the slide, because I want to see what you see on the screen and whether you can identify certain areas of motivation with some scenarios that I might post onto the slide. So let's get started. Okay, the four areas that I'll be talking about including today are self-determination theory, engagement in learning, motivation for and teaching and leadership, but it will be mainly focused on growth and growth mindset and goal theory as well. But I'll be touching on motivation for teaching and leadership. Okay. All right, so let's start off with the definition of motivation. And you might find that there are lots of different definitions of motivation, but these three in particular really represent what motivation is very clearly. And some of you might agree with the terms. If I ask you what is motivation, you might explain it as something called like the energy for action, where you invest your energy. You might look at it similar to Bromfy, where you talk about direction, right? How intense you might apply yourself and how persistent you are when you are faced with hardship. Or you might agree with what Andrew Martin, one of the professors, one of my colleagues at the University of New South Wales, how he defines it as the energy to drive and engage, to learn. And a lot of Andrew's work looks at motivation specifically at school. Okay, can I ask you which definition do you agree with the most? So if you go to the annotate function, you might find that there is a stamp function. Do you guys see that? And you can stamp it onto the screen. Is there one that draws your attention more compared to others?
Mahasiswa ini tadi ada pertanyaan dari Ellen. So if you need to answer her question, just speak up, just turn your speaker on and answer it directly. It's fine. Silakan. Perhaps you should repeat your question.
Oh, that's all right. If you're more comfortable with me just talking, I'm happy to do that as well. But okay, we'll try again. But as you can see from these three quotes here, the consistency is this implementation or investment into energy. So there is this consistent talk of energy for action. So when we talk about motivation, what we are looking at is what are the reasons behind behavior? Why do we see, what are the reasons behind why someone is doing something? Okay, and so that's what hopefully I will get across today to everyone today. So specifically, when we look at motivation in the classroom, we want to look at this, the degree to which students invest attention and effort. Okay, so you might think that students are sitting in your classroom, and because they're sitting in your classroom and they're doing the work, they are motivated. However, if we look at lots of these different theories in the next 4 days, next 4 lectures, I should say, the reasons behind their choices may differ, right? Depending on how we look at what they're doing. So if we look at this, we recognize that in the classroom, student motivation is used to explain the degree to which students invest attention and effort. And so we have to ask ourselves, why are they investing their attention in effort in that area when we told them to look at this area, right? And there may be lots of different reasons. And so student motivation is rooted in students' subjective experiences. So it's this notion that we need to understand what do the students understand to be what's going on in their environment, and to understand that there is this connection to willingness to engage in learning. And when I talk about engagement, I will be talking about motivation and engagement together. And there are more than one type of engagement. And I'll touch on it when we talk about specifically with engagement and how we might actually examine or understand whether a student is engaged or not. Okay. All right. So self-determination theory, and the big name that constantly will come up with SDT or self-determination theory is Ryan and Deci. Okay. There are 6 mini theories in self-determination theory. However, I will be only covering one because I won't be able to cover it in 1 hour. But if we look at self-determination theory, the reason why when we look at motivation that we start with self-determination theory is because it provides a very broad framework of how what is human motivation. And there has been 3 decades worth of research that has been invested into self-determination theory in lots of different domains, such as education, such as sport, and even health. Okay, so there are assumptions before I talk about self-determination theory specifically. There are assumptions to self-determination theory, and these are the 3, and I just want to briefly go over them with you before I jump into specifically about one of the mini theories. Okay, the first one is an assumption that humans are active organisms. Okay, so what do we mean by this is that they participate in learning. So yes, I'm talking, but you as listeners or students are also participating in this process of exchange as well. So how towards growing and mastering challenges. Okay, so students aren't just sitting in the classroom soaking up information, but they are cognitively actively participating in the learning process, right? What's really important, and there's a reason why some people might have particular goals. So at the beginning of every new year, you might have created a goal for yourself, a New Year resolution. For example, mine was to go to the gym every single week, right? So I can be healthy, I can grow some shoulder muscles, so I don't age too quickly, basically. But the problem is I've stopped now because of this second point here. We need ongoing social nutrients. What this means is that motivation, yes, it may be internal, but we need to be constantly fed. In another example is that the role of a teacher for student motivation is absolutely crucial. And one of the reasons why it's crucial is that motivation can fluctuate. It can be up and then it can get down, depending on what the activity is. And when the student's motivation goes down, it needs to be fed, right? It needs to be fed by an external person or external regulator, such as a teacher. So it needs ongoing social nutrients and support. So you might be working with students that might be very enthusiastic about learning a new language. At the beginning, learning a new language, because it's low in cognitive load, very easy. Students absorb information very, very efficiently, quickly. But as soon as the complexity increases and the difficulty gets higher, what happens is that students start getting deflated. Their motivation starts getting deflated. That's when the teacher needs to come in and be like, okay, we need to keep going for various different reasons. So this social nutrients is crucial. And the third point is that it's experience dependent. So depending on this active engagement, right, it can support or thwart a student's experience, which means, once again, depending on the social context, student motivation can decrease or increase. Okay, so these are the 3 assumptions of self-determination theory. Any questions before I move on? No? It's all good.
Silakan
It's
jika ada pertanyaan, anytime you can ask questions, okay? Do not need to be shy.
Don't be shy. Yes. Okay. So as you can see, there are 6 mini theories to self-determination theory. And the one that I'm going to be focusing on specifically today is this, the basic psychological needs theory. Okay. So I have a couple of master's students that are examining basic psychological needs in their own context. Okay, and you might wonder how are they doing it? And I will unpack it as we go through these basic psychological needs. But what is really neat about this mini theory is that it identifies 3 different psychological needs, and according to this mini theory is that if all 3 needs are met, there's optimal functioning. Okay, and it's touching on student well-being. Okay. All right, so let's jump into it. Okay, who has heard of the key terms such as intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation? Have you heard of this term before? Yes, intrinsic motivation, fantastic. Extrinsic motivation. So these are the 3. Well, we will look at it as a continuum. I'll show you in a slide later, but there is a continuum from intrinsic motivation to extrinsic motivation. And these are the 2 key terms that I want you to remember today. Intrinsic motivation, and when I talk about intrinsic motivation, this is doing an activity, a learning activity, purely because the student finds it interesting and enjoyable. So they're looking at that particular task that they're about to do, and that task is enjoyable and interesting. So as you can see in this example here with Holly, Holly is a 1st grader who loves school, right? She enjoys any academic task that is presented to her and approaches each activity with an extraordinary positive attitude. So as you can see with this example here, Holly's very intrinsically motivated because you can see she enjoys the academic task. Okay, and she approaches each task with a positive attitude. There is no distinction with a task that is easy, that is difficult, that is new, right? There is no association with where that's going to take her in the future either. There is just a recognition that Holly enjoys any academic task, okay? Compared to Linda. Okay, so Linda is very extrinsically motivated. And we can recognize this because when we look at extrinsic motivation, this is when the activity leads to some separable consequence. Okay, and this is a key word here with extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is associated with a separable consequence. Okay, right? And so if we look at Linda here, Linda is in year 10. She takes advanced mathematics and she spends a lot of time working on maths work and preparation for examinations. Why? Because of this, right? Because the $100, she gets $100 every time she gets an A on her math report. Okay, right. So is the $100, is there a direct relationship with the math activity that she's doing? No, there isn't. Okay, it's a completely separable consequence. It's a positive consequence, obviously, right? But what I want you to think about, and it's a reward, but what I want you to think about is what will happen if we take away the $100? What will we see with Linda's behavior towards maths? What do you think? Do you think that she will continue to study maths, or do you think she will stop studying maths? What do you think?
Ayo dijawab, silakan. Kalau $100 dihilangkan, masih termotivasi atau tidak?
No.
Probably not.
will stop the working on math.
What did they say, Enda?
Ya Pak Kobar,
I think
silakan.
Linda will stop.
You think Linda will
yeah.
stop? Mhm.
Yes.
Why do you think Linda will stop?
Because she will not she will not get 100,000 with
Yes.
yeah
Yes. Okay.
her
So
parents.
thank you, Mohammed. So you're
Yes.
saying that the reason why the energy that she's investing for studying maths is the $100, not because of the learning activity. Fantastic. That's absolutely correct. So this is what we are concerned about here. So when we look at extrinsic motivation, right? You might look at it and be like, okay, $100, good. Get A, get $100. What happens when we remove the $100? We might not want to see Linda's behavior. There is a trick though, and I'll tell you what the trick is, because the other thing that I look at with my colleague is behavior management. How do we support students with their behavior in a classroom? Okay. And the big question that I always get is, if extrinsic motivation is so negative, right? Because once we remove it, the behavior disappears, then what can we do? What I always tell the students is, if a student is not interested in learning, if for example, Linda does not like maths, she does not like maths, no matter how much we try to intrinsically motivate her, you will not have her attention. So you need to start off with a reward. Okay, you need to start off with a reward, have her attention, and then make maths interesting. Okay, but if you don't have her attention from the beginning, she won't learn. Okay, I just want to show you 2 experiments that were conducted by DESY in 1971. So this is a famous study, and there were 2 experiments. And DESY looked at 24 psychology students. 12 were in a control group and 12 were in the experimental group. So the control group, there is no manipulation. Experimental group, there is a manipulation. There were 3 different sessions in the experiment, in the first experiment, okay? So there were 3 13-minute sessions. Okay, so what happened was, in the first session, we can see here on the right-hand side, condition 1, the experimental group and the condition group both were asked to complete configurations of a puzzle. It was like a little cube puzzle. Okay. And then they were also given, during these 13 minutes, the experimenter told them play with the puzzle and then left the room for 8 minutes out of the 13 minutes. And they told the participants, you can do whatever you want, right? You can read a magazine, you can play with the puzzle, or you can do nothing, right? During the 8 minutes. And what they were measuring here is a measure of motivation. The way that they measured motivation was how much time was invested during the free time of 8 minutes. Okay, so like I said, condition 1, experimental group, condition group, control group, they were both told the same thing, complete the configuration, and then the experimenter left for 8 minutes. In condition 2, there was something a little bit different. The experimental group was paid $1 for every configuration correctly completed, but the control group were not. Okay, so what was the experimental group given? They were given an extrinsic motivation, okay, of the $1. And then in the third session, the experiment group and the condition group were given more configurations to do with the puzzle, but no dollars, right? So you can see that the manipulation happened in the condition 2, okay? Another experiment was conducted, very similar, but instead of the $1, what they were given instead, and I'm just getting my highlighter out, is the verbal reinforcement. Okay. Right? So in first experiment, they were given $1, right, for every configuration that they completed. In the second experiment, the experimental group were given a verbal reinforcement and a positive feedback. Okay, so let's see how the results went. So have a look. IM is intrinsic motivation. When in the first experiment, the experimental group were given the external reward or the extrinsic motivation, the intrinsic motivation started to decrease, right? However, look at this. The second point here, this is experiment number 2. When a person is engaged in some activity for reasons of intrinsic motivation, and if they begin to receive external rewards in the form of verbal reinforcement, right? Activity is enhanced, the intrinsic motivation. Can anybody think of the reason why? Because money and praise, verbal praise, are both extrinsic motivating, right? They're both extrinsic motivation. But why is there a difference between experiment 1 and experiment 2? Why do you think so? Take a guess. Don't be shy. I'll give you a clue. When you give positive feedback to a student, is a positive feedback connected, associated to the learning task? Yes or no? Yes, it is. Whereas the $, there's no link, right? See, the positive feedback, the verbal reinforcement is related to the learning activity, right? And that's why intrinsic motivation went up, right? So the time that the individual spent during the third session went up compared to in the first experiment after they received the money, it didn't go up. Okay, so when we're thinking about verbal reinforcement, praise, you need to think about how is that linked to the learning activity. Okay, so why we're focusing on self-determination theory? It's essential for well-being. We are recognizing that this basic psychological need is critical for academic achievement. So the 3 competence, autonomy, relatedness, all are together linked to optimal motivation and well-being. Okay, we're talking about not just high grades. We're not just talking about attendance rate. We're also talking about how much do the student feel like they belong in their community. Okay, in their schools, connected in their classrooms. How is their associations and relationship and rapport with the teacher as well? So it's looking at social environment that affords competence but fails to nurture relatedness is expected to result in some impoverishment of well-being. So you might look at competence, you might look at autonomy, and then you might think, okay, what's the point of relationship? Well, you need all 3 for the student to feel like they're part of the community in the classroom and at school, so they have optimal motivation and well-being. Okay, so I talked before about a continuum from extrinsic motivation all the way to intrinsic motivation. If I had more time, I would go through every single one of these different extrinsic motivation. However, I don't. So very, very briefly, I will talk about amotivation. This is when students, they have nothing. No matter what you do, they will do nothing, right? There is no regulation of their behavior. There is no choice making with whatever decisions they're trying to make. They are not present. They are not listening to you. They are not interested in doing anything, even if you keep giving rewards. Okay. There are different types of extrinsic motivation and is completely dependent on their level of self-regulation, right? And it's looking at how the student determines the association with the activity with something that is external. The closer that we get to intrinsic motivation, the external becomes more internal. Okay, so you might look at the external regulation as behaviors are completely dependent on something that is outside, like money, like rewards, like getting praise, like getting recognition. And slowly it becomes integrated, right? When the student could look at a particular learning activity and say, okay, I am doing this activity now because later on it's going to help me with my research. Okay, so it's internalized, but there's still a relationship with something that's going to happen outside. Whereas here in the intrinsic motivation, this is completely dependent on this enjoyment of the learning activity. There is no association with anything external to what they're just about to do. Okay, so, right. I want to cover 3 different needs. So there are 3 needs according to basic psychological needs theory and self-determination theory. There's competence, there's autonomy, and there's relatedness. Okay, so I'm going to start off with autonomy. Okay, so when we look at autonomy, this is specifically looking at the need, humans having the need to self-regulate their own experiences and actions. Okay, so you might sit there and think, does that mean that teachers will give free will to the students? They can do whatever they want, learn whatever they want. That's not what this is saying. Right? So there are things that still need to be put into place by the teacher, but the students need to feel, they need to feel that there is autonomy, that there is a choice. So you might have heard that students need to have a choice. We need to be able to choose those different aspects. This is where it's coming from, this recognition of autonomy. Okay, so what can we actually do to support autonomy? These are some of the things that we can do. So have a look at these points here. All right. When we start first day of the year, do you make rules with the students? Or does the teachers make the rules? Or what we suggest to future teachers is if there's around 5 classroom rules, 3 of them can be created by the teacher, right? But maybe 1 or 2, the students together can create the rules together, right? So it needs to be obviously associated with the school overall expectations. However, thinking about how we're going to make decisions, who's going to be part of the decision-making process, right? So this is where students are able to choose what is important and what is not important under the umbrella of the teacher. right? So there is lots and lots of guide. There may be assignments here, right? So if we look at assignments or even research projects, you might be given a guide by Enda. You can focus on maths, right? You can focus in the area of mathematics. You can focus in the area of motivation. But which theory you want to choose, that is up to you, right? Which area in mathematics, it is up to you. The age group of the students, you can choose. So you can see that there is still direction, but there is still choices that you can make as an individual. So this is what this is saying, right? I work with a lot of school principals, deputy principals at school, and what they're telling me a lot now is when they're about to do a task at school, they have to teach the students the rationale. Why are we learning calculus at school? Why are we learning how to do essay writing at school? And they have to make links with outside world. After you finish high school, this is what you're going to be doing. This is what's going to help you get this type of job. So this rationale or background information needs to be provided to the students so they feel autonomous in the classroom. Another thing is with student interest. There's a lot of research that looks at incorporating student interest. And one of the big things that's happening that is with a lot of educators' interest is with level of reading capability. And what they're finding at the moment, the teachers are finding, is that students are experiencing difficulty with reading. And the way that the teachers are incorporating into the classroom to support students to read a lot more is doing this, bringing in student interest. Right? They use a lot of AI here, and they get AI to write a script about things that they're interested in. So the students here, I think the big one at the moment because of the movie is Minecraft. Do you guys know Minecraft, the movie? So write a story about, is it Steve? Steve in Minecraft or something like that. Another one that my children are very interested in, Roblox. How do I incorporate Roblox so they're interested, right? So if they look at mathematics, my daughter is very interested in the concept of money lately. So if I'm trying to teach her how to do maths, I incorporate maths, right? What's another thing? I've noticed that in my undergraduate course, students have taught me all these little phrases. Oh, gosh, I can't remember. Skibbity doo dee. Have you heard of that term? Is that an Australian thing?
No, we haven't got something like that here.
You're very
It's
lucky.
something different.
They keep teaching me these sayings and getting me to say it during the lecture. So I'm constantly trying to incorporate it into the lecture so I have their attention. So it's things that they're interested in. So one of the things that you can do is listen to the students and then incorporate them. And like I mentioned before, is this meaningful, authentic connection to the real world. So a lot of the activities that we do or the assessments that we do here are associated with what they're just about to do in the future when they're teachers. Right? How is what we're doing right now going to impact when they're going to be teaching in the classroom in a couple of months? Okay, one of the reasons why I always like to incorporate asking questions and hearing your opinions is because of autonomy, because I want to hear about your perspectives, your opinions, right? Because it increases engagement and activity as well. Okay, let's move on. Okay, what else can we do? One of the biggest questions that I get asked when I speak about autonomy is, can students just choose whatever they want to do, right? According to self-determination theory? The answer is no. So autonomy is not saying the students are free to learn whatever they want to learn. No, what this is saying is that there needs to be structured choice. So the example that I gave you about a research project that you might need to do, looking at, okay, like what area of mathematics? Is it going to be an experimental design? Is it going to be a correlation design? Okay, am I going to be looking at university students? Am I going to be looking at primary school students or high school students? So it's looking at all these different activities with choice under the umbrella of autonomy. Okay. The other area that I do research in is with particular students who have lots of difficulty with learning. Okay, because of failing at school over and over again. And they get failed at school over and over again, and they get kicked out of school, and they have to move to a different school because the school says, I don't want you here. Okay, so repeated fails at multiple different schools. And we have a school called Schools for Specific Purposes in New South Wales. And one thing that we try to implement is providing them with choice with how they want to learn. And when we tried this first time and said to the students, choose what you want to do. Do you want to learn by listening? Do you want to learn by writing or reading, work in groups, work individually? When we gave them all those choices, the students got very stressed. They got very stressed because they were not used to making choices. So if you want to implement giving choice to the students in the classroom, you have to start small, right? You need to start with maybe 2 choices at the beginning, choose one or the other. And then if they get used to making choices, then introduce the 3rd one, and then introduce the 4th, and then a 5th. But if you start at the beginning with lots of different choices and students have never made a choice before, they won't know what to do. Is that clear? Yes? Okay, let's move on. All right, how would you know if a student feels like they have autonomy in the classroom? I'm going to show you a couple of questions, okay? What you can do is ask the students. How can you ask the students? On a scale. You can get them to complete or fill in a scale. Okay, so this is called a Likert scale. I'm sure everyone knows or seen a Likert scale. And you can ask the students to put here, how much do they agree with the statement? Okay, you can see it ranges from A all the way to B. I always feel like I choose things I do, to I sometimes feel like that it's not really me choosing things. Okay, so obviously we will want students to sit somewhere around here. Okay, right? They might say, I choose to do what I have to do, right? I do what I have to do, and I don't feel like it's really my choice. Okay, so here you can see here, the student feels no autonomy. Here, the student feels a lot of autonomy. So you can get the students to complete this anonymously. So don't get them to write their names. And so you can see where they sit. So these are some other questions. I do what I do because it interests me. 2, I do what I do because I have to. So you can see this range of questions here, right? And then I'm free to do whatever I decide to do. What I do is often not what I choose to do. I feel pretty free to do what I would want to choose to do. So you can see here, there are the key words here. Lots of autonomy. Okay, so you can ask the students these questions. Okay. So the next one that I want to talk about is competence. So you might have come across, and this is a second basic psychological need within this mini theory. And this particular one is talking about when the individual feels that they are capable to do something. The other word that is used often is the word for mastery, and I'll touch on this word as well when we talk about specifically with goal theory, goal orientation theory, because there's something called mastery goal orientation theory, and that was what my PhD thesis was on 10 years ago, right? And it's looking specifically with here is whether the student feels like there is a need to master something. Okay, so once again, this is a second basic psychological need. So when we look at competence, what we are looking at is optimal challenge. We're not focusing on assessment, and we want to provide a student or students an opportunity for them to succeed. And I've highlighted this one because this one is particularly important for students, especially students who have failed over and over and over again. Students who have failed over and over and over again, they would now look at what they're just about to do and think, I can't do that. I'm going to fail. I'm not even going to try. So we're trying to break that cycle by giving them an opportunity to succeed. And this is something that we need to be aware of when we create tasks for our students. Okay. All right. So what can we do? Have a look at these 3 points here. Why? The reason why we want to ask questions to the students rather than only giving answers is because we are trying to build their knowledge base. We're trying to guide them to the correct answer. So one of the things in cognitive load theory is that if you only provide the answers to the students are going to do trial and error, right? But what you want to do is give them a clear step-by-step outworked example and get them to study something very, very similar. Okay. And when they study something and they might get something incorrect, you ask them, where do you think you went wrong? Compare the example answer with your answer, right? You're constantly giving them feedback and you're asking them, instead of saying that this is the right answer, so you have to go back and fix it. Constantly getting them to question themselves. All right. And you're, instead of setting yourself as an expert to the subject, you want to provide the students a guide, right? The reason why is because you're getting them not to feel like they're inadequate. You want to build a rapport or a relationship with the students so they feel like they are working with you. Right? There's a relationship built between the student and the teacher, and you want the student to constantly ask you questions because the questioning will tell you whether the student has understood or not. Okay? So let's continue. Another thing that you can do, is provide them with modeling, right? A lot of students may feel like they don't know how to behave in a particular way in the classroom, right? Showing them, for example, how to sit down, do your work, or ask questions, contribute. If you can show them what a good model will look like, will help them successfully finish or accomplish a goal, right? Providing them with a scaffold. This is providing them with a structure, an outline of what they need to do. So for example, in one of the assessment tasks that I give my master's student is an essay question. What goes into introduction? The essay question, introduction, the body, and then conclusion. What do I expect in each of the different sections? Asking questions. Have you answered this? Have you answered that? Are there 3 points in the discussion, in the body? And then have you wrapped up in your conclusion? So providing them with a scaffold of what you expect is very, very helpful. The third point here is bite-sized sizes of work. This is very, very important when the learning activity is highly complicated, right? If the learning activity is highly complicated and you want to reduce cognitive load for the student, right? And you want to increase success in this for the student to experience, you need to break it down. The other term is associated with is the segmentation effect. If you can segment and break down the content for the student for them to process, this will help with the facilitation of the task as well. This fourth point is associated with the worked examples. If you can provide them with a clear worked examples that they can study and then do, study and do. So they're learning and they're applying, learning and they're applying. And what this really, what this does, and it's highly important, is that it creates a schema for the long-term memory. Right? It provides a student with a representation of a model answer to remember, to study and then remember. Okay. What the fifth point is saying is that learning is not just about the end result. So when we talk about the product, we're talking about the end result. It's actually talking about what is happening during the learning process. How much effort is invested during the learning process? What are the strategies that are used during the learning process? It's not just about getting 100% at the end of it, but it's looking at, did the student actually understand? Is the learning strategies actually effective? Has the student given opportunities? Do they know, right? Do they know that they have improved? So what's really important about this particular one is that then I always suggest doing a pre-test and doing a post-test. If you do a pre-test for the student will be able to, and if they get 10 out of 20, and then at the end of the lesson, you get them to do the same test again. And if this student has experienced failure over and over again, you can, and then let's say that they went up to 15 out of 20. If they go, I failed again, you go, no, you started at 10, now you're at 15. You're actually giving them evidence that they have learned something. So you're showing them that they are actually being successful, right? Okay, so if we continue, you can see here, if the students are also given an opportunity of how to assess their own work. If a student, like the students that I've spoken about before, the ones that do not have the self-regulation to choose, they may not be able to assess themselves correctly. Okay, so it's important that at the beginning, even the teachers need to give a good example of what, how to assess correctly. Okay, so, and if the students can go back and check their work, this is really, really important. If the student can track their own work and accuracy, this is also very, very useful as well. However, just mind you, some students, they just want to go fast. They want to go fast because they want to finish fast. That means that they can play early, right? So what needs to be taught here is regulation. Students need to be taught that it's not just about how fast they go, but they need to understand and regulate their own learning here. Regulate it with what? A rubric or an assessment criteria. Okay, so if the student has access to a learning, a self-assessment criteria or a rubric, that is fantastic. Then they're able to then go back and look at their work and see where they have addressed each of the points in the criteria. Okay, so if we add autonomy and competence together, what research has shown, this is a Ryan and Deci 1985 paper, what they've shown is choice, acknowledgement of feelings, and opportunities of self-direction increases intrinsic motivation. It is absolutely positive. However, if there are deadlines, if there are threats, if there are lots of testings, right, and competition, it decreases intrinsic motivation. Okay, so as you can see, intrinsic motivation is supported by what the teacher does and what is the learning environment that the teacher has created in the classroom. Okay, any questions so far? No? Okay, this is the last of the basic psychological need. So the last one is relatedness. And I think this is one of the most important. The reason why I think this is so important is if the student does not like the teacher, think about the teacher that you did not like, the one that really upset you, the one that stressed you out at school, right? No matter how much choice they give you, no matter how nice they are doing something for you, you're not going to learn, right? If the student does not like the teacher, they will not learn, right? So what is relatedness? This is when the individual feels cared for, right? That this individual feels like they matter. And there is a connection with the others. It's not just between student and teacher, but it's also student and student. So one of the examples that I give is in the classroom. If there has been an argument between two best friends at lunchtime and they enter into the classroom and you're teaching it, are they going to listen? No, they won't listen, right? Because this is broken. This relatedness is broken. Okay, so when we look at relatedness, why is it important? School motivation cannot be understood apart from the social fabric in which it is embedded. This is talking about the importance of the social interactions that are happening within the learning environment, whether it's the playground, whether it's the classroom, whether it's the school overall. But we can't look at motivation without looking at the relationships that's happening within the school. Okay? All right. So when we look at relatedness, we are looking at this connection through positive relationships, a feeling like they're cared for, sense of belonging. This is when the student feels like they're part of a community, right? Feeling that you matter, there is a role for them, right? And according to self-determination theory, motivation is more likely to flourish. It's likely to increase when the student feels like they are safe. There is security and there is relatedness. Then intrinsic motivation will increase. Okay. Look at this point here. Lower intrinsic motivation in students when teachers are cold, right? When teachers are mean and nasty, right? And not caring. This is when intrinsic motivation decreases, right? This is when the student feels like they're constantly getting punished. Okay. Relatedness also is a feeling when there's social connection. And the second point here, I always emphasize to the students, reciprocal. This is give and take, right? Give and take. So it's not just about the teacher giving, and the student taking, but it needs to be, there has to be a conversation given, right? So for example, the teachers that used to always make jokes in the classroom and want the students to laugh, they were probably more popular than the cold teachers, right? And the students probably learned a lot more. It's because of this. It's because of the relatedness factor. It's talking about, when we talk about dynamics, we're looking at all the different areas where relationship can happen. Students and teachers, teachers and teachers, students and students, other staff members, parents, community leaders, all those different areas of where social interactions can happen will impact relatedness. Okay. All right. When we look at research that goes through preschool all the way to high school, this is looking at age 4 to all the way to age 17, right? Preschool to high school. What they found was relationships founded on warmth, trust, empathy, and positive relations are associated with, look at this, participation. This is correlation. Positive participation, reduction in disruptive behavior, and positive outcomes, right? So this is all associated just with relatedness. In universities, you can see here teacher friendliness and concern and respect for students was also positively associated with achievement. Relatedness is very, very important, okay? Because you can see this positive outcome from the ages of 4 all the way to university. Highly, highly important. You can see here, there's been 46 published studies and 13 are longitudinal. So it's not just cross-sectional, but looking at long period of time. Student-teacher relationships positively associated with adjustment, academic achievement, positive school attendance, and decreases with disruptive behaviors, suspension, and dropouts, right? Students are more likely to behave positively with a teacher that they like rather than they dislike. If the student feels like they're part of the school, do they represent the school, then they're more likely to behave in a positive way than in a negative way. Okay, quickly recap. You can see here, we've talked about self-determination theory in the basic psychological needs. You can see here that there is a continuum depending on the 3 basic psychological needs. The student will move up and down. Okay, right? You'll be able to see that depending on the basic psychological need and how self-determined they are, this will determine whether they're intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated. And when we talk about extrinsically motivated, and I'll finish off with this, this is, like I mentioned before, activity done to attain a separable outcome. This could be praise, this could be money, this could be academic achievement, trying to get an 100% in a test. These are all separable outcomes to the learning environment. Okay, so look at this one here. Luke does his homework only because he's scared of his parents. Okay. Why does he do it? Because he doesn't want to get in trouble. Mary does her work because she personally believes it's valuable for her chosen career. Yes, it's positive, but this is still extrinsic motivation because it's not talking about the work, right? There is another outcome. Okay. What is very important is that a lot of the school activities are not fun. And it gets worse as the students get older. They're not, schools are not designed to be interesting. Right? Right? And that's really difficult because here I am saying that we need to make it interesting. Teachers have to make it interesting and want to rapport with the students, right? And so the question you might be looking at going that, how do I make maths interesting? How do I make essay writing interesting? It's very, very difficult, right? So you need to really think about how am I going to motivate students to value activities? And this is why, even though I suggest intrinsic motivation is key, there still needs to be value added into the learning activity. How is what they're doing associated with tomorrow? How is what you're learning today associated with what they're going to do next year? What does what they're learning right now look like in the real world? So this constant relationship with the external world. Okay, so you're giving it value. You're allowing the students to regulate their own learning. You're making the value that you give to them internal, right? And what's really important is that once it's internalized, which means the student has made it theirs, when it gets hard, when the learning material gets harder, because it becomes more and more complex, they become more persistent. They're more likely to be resilient. So if they fail, what happens after? Failing is not the problem, or it can be a problem, but what happens after? Did they learn from what they did wrong? So the failure doesn't happen again. That's the question that needs to be asked. What can the teacher do to make sure that the student does not give up? Okay. All right. So I just want to show this because this is the last slide. When we look at extrinsic motivation, the question that I always get is reward, including feedback. How can we use rewards effectively? Because like I mentioned before, if a student is not interested at all, right? No matter how interested they are in the learning activity, they won't look at it. They will not put attention to it. So you need to start off with a reward. You have to show them, if you do this, then you'll get a reward, right? But what's really important is that rewards can control behavior. Oh, wrong color. It can control behavior. And it can also be dependent, students can get dependent on who gives the reward because they want the reward, right? The important thing is that rewards convey information. It also tells you what's important. So how and when the rewards are given. At the beginning, especially with behavior, especially with this, if you're trying to change a behavior, when you see the behavior, you need to give the reward. See reward, behavior, reward, behavior, reward. As soon as you see there's an increase, the reward has to give at random. So what it's allowing the students to do is, oh, I think if I do it now, I might get another reward, right? But if they know that they're going to get the reward, you won't see the behavior when the reward's taken away. Because what you want to do is make sure that the behavior is there even when the reward is not. Okay, so the balance has to be made, and it's almost at random that you need to give the reward to make sure that the student has actually learned how to behave effectively. All right. So as you can see here, explain to the students why they're being rewarded. Make sure that the rewards can, it's not just about being the best. Think of the ways that you can set up the reward structures. Make sure you reward for effort or improvement, not just because they're coming first. Okay? All right. And thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I think I went over time. Sorry, Enda.
No, no, it's okay. All right, so as long as we do not need to pay you extra, Ellen.
Not for you, Enda.
Okay, so students, now you are given time to ask your questions. Silahkan siapa yang mau bertanya. If
I have
you
question, ma'am.
shy with your English, you may speak bahasa Indonesia, and I'll try to translate it for you. Mari silahkan siapa yang mau bertanya. Should I
Yanwar,
give you
please.
reward to be motivated to ask questions? Anybody?
Okay, I have
Oh
I have
yeah, but
question.
you know, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mom Ellen. With grateful and insightful your presentation about determination theory. I have two questions. The first question, how to build an academic atmosphere so that extrinsic motivation is built without reduce the intrinsic motivation that already exists in each student. So I have many cases in my student in college, especially in mathematics classroom. They have a high intrinsic motivation, but while they have many big problem or complex problem solving, I think in classroom, so they reduce or maybe they lost intrinsic motivation. How about it? And second question, what different treatment in your experiment about reinforcement verbal and positive feedback? Can you explain or give example about reinforcement verbal and positive feedback in your experiment? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So if I answer your first question, you have, if I've heard it correctly, you have, you teach mathematics, right? And students are intrinsically motivated in your mathematics class until they study something very difficult. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes. And then
Correct.
their intrinsic motivation decreases. Yes? So how to
Yes.
increase their intrinsic motivation? Number one, it's very difficult because students experience this when when they start trying to study something very difficult. So no, it's very natural. And this is where we go back to one of the three assumptions of self-determination theory, where we have to recognize the social aspect of motivation. You as a teacher needs to feed their motivation. That's what it is. And this is where we look at segmenting, where we look at cognitive load and look at how can we break down the thing that is highly complicated so the student feels like they can do it. Right? So if you can break down the complex mathematic task into smaller steps, right, and teach them how to do that, and then apply it to a similar complex question, it will be difficult, but once they can see that they can do it, the competence will increase, right? And sorry, what was your second question?
What different treatment in your experiment about reinforcement verbal and positive feedback? Can you explain?
So you're talking about reinforcement theory, experiment. So see, that's when we talk about reinforcement, are you talking about the thing that you need to think about is what are we reinforcing, right? So if you are reinforcing behavior, right? The treatment could be, number one, is the reinforcement positive for a student, or is it a punishment for a student? So that could be 2 experimental groups, right? Because I might think teacher praise is a reinforcement to a student, but for some student, it might be a punishment because they don't want teacher praise because it's not cool. That could be an example as well. Another thing is, when is the reinforcement given? How closely are the students reinforced with what we want them to do? So that needs to be very, very clear as well. So you can do an experiment that looks at differences in time. Do you give it immediate? Do you give it a little bit later? Another thing that you can do is, are you going to tell them why you are reinforcing that particular behavior? So does the student know why you are reinforcing or what they are reinforcing versus them not getting reinforced as well? Did I answer your question? And did I?
Enough.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, not a problem.
terima kasih. Bu Dila.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ellen, for your very inspiring speech. Yeah, and yeah, I have one question related to relatedness in intrinsic motivation. We as mathematics teachers probably want to be close to students, but students usually don't approach us. We think this is not because they don't like the teacher, but they're more afraid of mathematics math. So I want to ask you, can you give us some tips maybe or tricks? What should we do to build closeness with students so it can increase their motivation?
Yeah, it's very hard because mathematics is it's very difficult. And it's hard because you can't bring in, it's very difficult, and I shouldn't say you can't, it's very difficult to bring in student interest into what you're about to teach them. I used to always ask, why are we learning calculus? I still don't understand why we need to learn calculus, right? But if the teachers can link up calculus with a job that I wanted to do in the future, I think that would have been very beneficial. Linking up with future prospects, right? That's all I remember from high school maths, to be honest. But if, for example, if it was statistics, I use stats all the time because of research and I would know, right? And now I look at I see the importance of having learnt statistics, right? So another thing is, I think letting them tell you that they don't like maths is fine. But telling them, I'm sorry, but you can't just do what you want all the time, right? And it's because the important thing is that the students have a voice, right? And then you hear them and you can go, yes, Nyla, I hear that maths sucks. It's not fun. However, it's not fun because it's difficult and it's very complicated. Okay, but if you can make the complex manageable for the student, right? And if it's manageable as in a goal, right, for them to achieve, and they do it, and tell them, hey, remember how you disliked this, but you can do it now, and let them feel that excitement, I think that's very powerful as well. Yeah.
It's hard work, but we will try. Thank you.
Not a
Thank you,
problem.
Ellen.
Thank you.
Okay, if we make it around into 11:30 in Yogyakarta now, or 2:30 in your time, maybe we still have about 4 minutes for students to ask questions. Silahkan, masih ada yang mau bertanya? Okay, if not, Ellen was already planning these sessions, break them down into 4 sessions. So we still meet her next week at the same time on Wednesdays. If you would like to reflect today's talk, today's lectures, and then may have question later on, you can ask the questions next week on Wednesdays. We should wrap up today's talk, Ellen. Thank you very much for your time, and looking forward to having your PowerPoint slides. That would be helpful for the students.
Yep, I'll send it to you.
All
Mhm.
right, that's great. Okay, well, mahasiswa mungkin bisa membuka speakernya dan menyampaikan thank you sama-sama. Okay, we would like to say thank you again for today's talk to you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you on
Ellen.
Wednesday.
Thank you.
Have a nice day today. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
Hey, Ellen.
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
wabarakatuh.